HY review, study design, bias, and inference. 40 questions on where the NBME hides its traps, the design that fits the question, the bias that fakes the result, and the p-value that fools you. Read the command, spot the trap, commit, and move. Clock starts now. Which design is most efficient for a rare exposure? Researchers want to study the health effects of a rare occupational exposure, a chemical used only in one specialized factory, where the possible outcomes are fairly common. Read the command. Best design for a rare exposure. Start with the exposed group and follow them forward. When the E-exposed air is rare, a cohort is most efficient. You deliberately recruit the hard-to-find exposed group, the factory workers, plus an unexposed comparison, and follow both for the outcome. The mirror rule is that a rare disease favors a case-control study. Match the design to whichever is rare. The correct answer is C. A case-control study is the efficient choice for a rare disease, not a rare exposure. Starting from disease status would give you very few exposed people to analyze. Choice A wrong. A cross-sectional study only takes a one-time snapshot, so it cannot follow the exposed group forward to measure incidence. Choice B wrong. A rare exposure calls for a cohort. What is this design, and what is the drug-free interval for? In a trial for chronic stable migraine, each patient takes the study drug for one period, then goes to a drug-free interval, then takes placebo, so every patient serves as their own control. Read the command, name the design, and the reason for the drug-free interval. Each patient is their own control, and the gap clears leftover drug effect. This is a crossover trial. Each patient receives both treatments in sequence and acts as their OWN control, which removes between-person variability. The drug-free interval is the washout, whose job is to clear any carryover of the first treatment so it cannot contaminate the second period. Crossover designs work best for stable chronic conditions. Correct answer is A. A parallel RCT assigns each patient to only own treatment in separate groups, so patients do not cross over or serve as their own controls. Choice B wrong. The washout period exists to remove carryover, not to blind investigators. Blinding is a separate measure entirely. Choice E wrong. Each patient taking both treatments with the washout is a crossover trial. What is this called? To increase statistical power, a researcher combines the numerical results of 15 separate randomized trials of the same drug into a single pooled estimate of effect. Read the command, name the method. Statistically pooling many studies into one estimate is a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis statistically combines the quantitative results of multiple studies into one pooled estimate, boosting power and precision beyond any single trial. It usually sits inside a systematic review, but the defining feature is the numerical pooling of results. The correct answer is E. A systematic review is the structured search and appraisal of the literature. It becomes a meta-analysis only when the results are also statistically pooled, which is the step described here. Choice A wrong. A narrative review summarizes studies informally without a quantitative pooled estimate. Choice D wrong. Pooling many studies' numbers is a meta-analysis, which provides the highest level of evidence for therapy. An evidence committee ranks study types by how strongly they should guide a treatment decision. Read the command, highest level of evidence for therapy. Pooled randomized trials sit at the top. The evidency pyramid for therapy is topped by a systematic review or meta-analysis of randomized trials because randomization plus pooling gives the strongest, least biased estimate of effect. Below that come single RCTs, then cohort, then case control studies, then case series, with expert opinion at the bottom. The correct answer is B. Expert opinion is the weakest form of evidence, sitting at the bottom of the pyramid, not the top. Choice C wrong. A single case control study ranks well below randomized trials because it is observational and prone to bias. Choice A wrong. A systematic review of RCTs is the highest level of evidence. Which phase of clinical trials is this? A new drug is given to humans for the first time, a small group of about 30 healthy volunteers, to assess safety, tolerability, and how the body handles the drug. Read the command. Which trial phase? First in human, small, healthy volunteers, safety, that is, phase 1. P-Chase, I is the first in human study, a small group of usually healthy volunteers focused on safety, tolerability, and pharmacokinetics, how the body absorbs and clears the drug. Efficacy is not the goal yet. Phase 2 then tests efficacy and dosing in patients. Phase 3 is the large comparative RCT, and Phase IV is post-marketing surveillance. The correct answer is D. Phase 2 tests efficacy and dosing in patients who have the disease, not safety in healthy volunteers. Choice C wrong. Preclinical work happens in the lab and in animals before any human dosing, so it does not fit a study given to volunteers. Choice E wrong. A first-in-human safety study in healthy volunteers is Phase 1. What type of trial is this? A new antibiotic is cheaper and has fewer side effects than the standard drug, but it is not expected to work any better. Investigators design a trial to show the new drug is not meaningfully worse than the standard, within a preset margin. Read the command. The trial type aiming to show not worse. A preset margin of acceptable worseness is the tell. A none. Inferiority trial asks whether a new treatment is not worse than the standard by more than a predefined margin. It is used when the new option has other advantages, lower cost, fewer side effects, so proving it is merely not meaningfully worse is enough. It is a one-sided question, unlike an equivalence trial. Correct answer is A. A superiority trial tries to prove the new drug is better than the comparator, which is explicitly not the goal here. Choice B wrong. An equivalence trial tests whether two treatments are neither better nor worse, a two-sided question, whereas non-inferiority only cares that the new drug does not fall below the margin. Choice E wrong. Showing not worse within a margin is a non-inferiority trial. What design is this? Within a large ongoing cohort that has banked blood samples from everyone at enrollment, researchers identify all members who later develop the disease and select a sample of non-disease cohort members as controls. They then assay the stored samples only for those selected. Read the command, name the design. Cases and controls are drawn from inside an existing cohort. A nested case control study runs a case control analysis within an existing cohort. You take the cases that arose and a sample of controls from the same cohort, then do the expensive testing only on those selected. It saves money and effort. For example, assaying bank samples for a subset instead of the whole cohort, while keeping the cohort's advantages. The correct answer is C. A parallel RCT requires randomly assigning an intervention, but here no one is randomized. Subjects are simply observed within the cohort. Choice D wrong. An ecological study uses group level data, not individual cases and control sample from a cohort. Choice B wrong. A case control analysis inside a cohort is a nested case control study. Which bias is this? A cross-sectional study examines a risk factor and a rapidly fatal heart disease. Patients who die within days of onset are gone before they can be surveyed, so the study captures only longer-term survivors, who tend to have milder disease. The exposure-disease relationship comes out distorted. Read the command. The bias from studying only survivors. Fast deaths drop out before enrollment. Niemann bias, also called prevalence. Incidence bias arises when a study captures only prevalent surviving cases and misses those who died or recovered quickly. Because the fast fatal cases never make it into a cross-sectional survey, the surviving sample is unrepresentative, distorting the exposure-disease link. It is a form of selection bias tied to disease timing. The correct answer is B. Recall bias is about cases. Remembering exposures differently, not about who survives long enough to be studied, choice or wrong. Confounding is distortion by a third variable associated with both exposure and outcome. Here the distortion comes purely from selectively sampling survivors, choice E, wrong. Missing early deaths by studying prevalent cases is name-in bias. Which bias explains the finding? A study finds that factory workers have lower overall mortality than the general population and concludes the factory environment is protected. In truth, people healthy enough to hold a job are healthier than the general population, which also includes the disabled and chronically ill. Read the command, why employed people look healthier. The workforce is healthier at baseline than the general public. The healthy worker effect is a selection bias in occupational studies. Employed people are, on average, healthier than the general population, which includes those too sick to work. Comparing workers to the general public therefore makes any job look falsely protective. The right comparison is another working population, not everyone. The correct answer is E. Confounding by indication describes a treatment being given because of disease severity, distorting drug outcome studies. It has nothing to do with comparing workers to the public, choice D, wrong. Lead time bias is a screening artifact about earlier diagnosis, unrelated to occupational selection, choice a wrong. Employed people being healthier at baseline is the healthy worker effect. Which bias is this? A male survey on alcohol use is returned by only 30% of recipients, and heavy drinkers are much less likely to respond than light drinkers. The results understate true alcohol consumption. Read the command, the bias from who doesn't reply. Non-responders differ systematically from responders. Responsive bias occurs when the people who do not respond differ systematically from those who do. Here, heavy drinkers stay silent, so the responding sample is skewed toward light drinkers, and the survey underestimates true consumption. It is a selection problem created by the pattern of who chose to participate. The correct answer is D. Recall bias involves inaccurate memory of past exposures, not the pattern of who returns a survey, choice A, wrong. Confounding is distortion by a third variable, whereas this bias arises purely from selective participation, choice C, wrong. Systematically missing heavy drinkers who won't reply is non-response bias. Which bias threatens the results? In a cohort study of a new therapy, patients who felt worse gradually stopped showing up and dropped out before the final assessment. Only those doing well remain to be measured, making the therapy look more effective than it is. Read the command. The bias from selective dropout. Those doing poorly leave, skewing the remaining sample. ATTRT bias, or loss to follow-up bias, occurs when participants who leave a study differ systematically from those who stay. Here the patients doing worse drop out, so only those doing well are left to measure, falsely inflating the therapy's apparent benefit. It is a selection bias that develops during follow-up. The correct answer is B. Bergson bias is a selection problem at entry, from studying hospitalized patients, not from dropout during follow-up, choice D, wrong. Recall bias concerns inaccurate memory of exposures, unrelated to who stays in the study, choice A, wrong. Selective dropout of sicker patients is attrition bias. What is this technique? In a randomized trial, to keep the enrolling investigator from steering sicker patients into the treatment arm, the upcoming group assignment is hidden from that investigator until after each patient has been irreversibly entered into the study. Read the command. The technique that hides the next assignment at enrollment. It stops investigators from manipulating who goes where. Locketti and Konschelman hides the upcoming randomization assignment from the person enrolling patients, so they cannot consciously or unconsciously channel sicker or healthier patients into a preferred arm. It protects the randomization process itself at the moment of assignment, a different safeguard from blinding, which hides assignments after randomization during treatment and assessment. Correct answer is A. Double blinding keeps patients and investigators unaware of assignments during treatment and outcome assessment, but it does not govern the moment of allocation the way concealment does. Choice B, wrong. Matching is a method to control confounding by pairing subjects on key variables, not a way to protect randomization. Choice D, wrong. Hiding the assignment at enrollment is allocation concealment. Which bias is this, and what prevents it? In an unblinded trial, the investigator who knows which patients receive the active drug consistently rates their improvement more favorably, because he expects the drug to work. Read the command, name the bias and its fix. The rater's expectations color the outcome, blinding removes them. Observer bias assessment bias occurs when the person measuring the outcome lets their expectations shape the result, here rating the treated group as better because he assumes the drug works. The fix is blending the assessor to treatment assignment, so expectations cannot influence the ratings. The correct answer is E. Selection bias concerns how subjects enter or are grouped, not how an outcome is rated, and randomization addresses selection rather than biased assessment. Choice B, wrong. Recall bias is about subjects' memory of exposures and is not fixed by matching in this scenario. Choice A, wrong. An assessor's expectations skewing the rating is observer bias, prevented by blinding. What is the expected effect on the measured association? A study measures exposure with a crude questionnaire that misclassifies exposed and unexposed people at random, equally in the diseased and non-diseased groups. Non-differential misclassification. Read the command, effect of random equal misclassification. Random noise and exposure blurs any real difference. Non-differential misclassification is random error that affects both groups equally. Mixing some truly exposed people into the unexposed group and vice versa blurs the contrast between them, diluting any true association and pulling the estimate toward the null toward 1 for a ratio. Random measurement error tends to hide real effects, not invent them. The correct answer is C. Biasing away from the null. Exaggerating or reversing an effect is a hallmark of differential misclassification, where errors differ between groups. Not the random equal error described here. Choice A, wrong. The error does move the point estimate, so saying it affects only precision understates its impact. Choice E, wrong. Non-differential misclassification bias is toward the null. Which bias explains the false benefit? A study compares patients who filled a certain prescription after hospital discharge with those who never filled it. To fill the prescription, a patient had to survive the days between discharge and pickup, and that survival time is counted as treated time. The drug looks strongly protective. Read the command, the bias from guaranteed survival time. Patients had to live long enough to get treated. High immortal time bias arises when there is a stretch of follow-up during which, by the study's own definition, a patient cannot have the outcome. Here, patients must survive long enough to fill the prescription, so that guaranteed alive period gets miscounted as treated time. This artificially lowers the event rate in the treated group and fakes a protective effect. The correct answer is D. Lead time bias is about diagnosing the same disease, EAR Lear, and mismeasuring survival, not about a guaranteed survival window before treatment. Choice A, wrong. Link time bias concerns preferentially detecting slow-growing disease in screening, unrelated to prescription timing. Choice B, wrong. A guaranteed alive interval misassigned as treated time is immortal time bias. Which bias is this? A meta-analysis of a drug pools mostly positive trials. Investigation reveals that several small trials with negative results were completed but never published, and a funnel plot of the studies is clearly asymmetric. The pooled estimate overstates the true effect. Read the command, the bias from unpublished negative studies. Positive results get published, negative ones vanish. Publication bias occurs because studies with positive, significant results are more likely to be published than negative or null ones. A meta-analysis that can only find the published, mostly positive studies then overstates the true effect. An asymmetric funnel plot, with small negative studies missing from one corner, is the classic clue. The correct answer is E. Attrition bias is about participants dropping out of a single study during follow-up, not about whole studies going unpublished. Choice D wrong. Confounding is distortion by a third variable within a study, not a problem of which studies make it into the literature. Choice C wrong. Missing negative studies inflating a meta-analysis is publication bias. What best explains this apparent improvement? Patients are enrolled in a study specifically because they had an extremely high blood pressure on a single screening reading. Weeks later, with no treatment given, their average blood pressure is noticeably lower. Read the command, why extreme values fall on their own. Picking people by an extreme reading guarantees the next reading looks better. Regression to the mean is a statistical phenomenon. When people are chosen because of an extreme measurement, their later measurements tend to move back toward the average, simply because part of the extreme was random fluctuation. Here, the very high initial readings partly reflected chance, so repeat readings fall even without any treatment. The correct answer is B. The placebo effect requires an inert treatment that patients believe is active, but no treatment was given here. Choice A wrong. The Hawthorne effect is a change in behavior from being observed, not a statistical drift of extreme values. Choice C wrong. Extreme values falling toward average on repeat is regression to the mean. Which screening bias is this? A screening program detects many small, indolent tumors that would never have caused symptoms or death during the patient's lifetime. 5-year survival statistics rise, but the disease's mortality rate in the population is unchanged, and many patients undergo unnecessary treatment. Read the command. The bias from detecting harmless disease. Finding tumors that never would have mattered inflates survival but not mortality. Overdiagnosis is the detection of disease, often via screening, that would never have caused symptoms or death in the patient's lifetime. Adding these harmless cases inflates survival statistics and case counts while doing nothing to mortality, and it exposes patients to unnecessary treatment. It is why survival can rise without any real benefit. Correct answer is A. Lead time bias involves detecting disease that would matter just earlier and mismeasuring its survival, not detecting disease that never would have mattered at all. Choice B wrong. Confounding is distortion by a third variable, not the detection of clinically silent disease. Choice D wrong. Detecting harmless disease that never affects mortality is overdiagnosis. Which bias is this? In a case control study, the interviewer knows which subjects are cases and which are controls. Believing the exposure matters, she probes the cases much more thoroughly about past exposures than the controls. Read the command, the bias from the interviewer's behavior. Knowing case status changes how she collects data. Interviewer. Bias, a type of ascertainment bias, happens when the person collecting the data lets their knowledge of case status change how they question subjects. Here, probing cases harder than controls. This is different from recall bias, which comes from the subject's memory. The fix is to blind interviewers to case status. The correct answer is C. Recall bias comes from the subjects remembering exposures differently, not from how the interviewer asks. The source here is the interviewer, not the participant's memory. Choice A wrong. Selection bias concerns who gets enrolled, not how they are questioned once in the study. Choice B wrong. An interviewer probing cases more than controls is interviewer bias. For smoking to be a confounder, which must be true, a study links coffee drinking to lung cancer. It turns out smokers drink more coffee, and smoking causes lung cancer. Smoking is not a step in any causal chain from coffee to cancer. Read the command, the defining features of a confounder, tied to both exposure and outcome, but not a middle step. A confounder must be associated with both the exposure and the outcome, and must not lie on the causal pathway between them. Smoking fits, It is linked to coffee drinking and independently causes lung cancer, but it is not a step from coffee to cancer. That is what lets it create a false coffee cancer association. The correct answer is D. A variable that is an intermediate step between exposure and outcome is a mediator, not a confounder, and adjusting for it would wrongly erase part of the real effect. Choice C wrong. Being associated with the outcome alone is not enough. A confounder must also be linked to the exposure. Choice B wrong. A confounder is tied to both exposure and outcome off the causal path. Which method controls confounding in the analysis phase? A study is already finished. An analyst realizes age is a confounder that was measured but never accounted for and wants to control for it now, using only the collected data. Read the command, a confounding control, usable after data collection. Design methods are already too late, use analysis methods. Once data are collected, confounding is controlled in the analysis phase by stratification, analyzing within age bands or multivariate regression, statistically adjusting for age. Design phase tools, randomization, restriction, matching must be built in before or during data collection and cannot be applied to a finished study. The correct answer is E. Randomization is a DE sign phase method applied when assigning subjects, so it cannot be added to a study that is already complete. Choice A wrong. Restriction also happens at the design stage by limiting who is enrolled, not after the data are in. Choice B wrong. Post hoc control uses stratification or multivariate adjustment. Which specific bias is this? An observational study finds that patients given a stronger painkiller have worse outcomes than those given a weaker one. On review, the stronger drug was prescribed specifically to the sickest patients, so their disease severity, the very reason for the prescription, drives both the treatment choice and the poor outcome. Read the command, the bias when severity drives both the drug choice and the outcome. The reason for treating is itself the confounder. Confounding, by indication, is a special confounding where the silical reason for prescribing a treatment here, greater disease severity independently affects the outcome. The sickest patients get the stronger drug and do worse because they were sicker to begin with, making the drug look harmful. Severity is associated with both the treatment and the outcome. The classic confounder pattern. The correct answer is B. Effect modification would mean the drug's true effect differs across severity strata. Not that severity distorts a single overall estimate. Here, severity is confounding the result, not modifying a real effect. Choice A wrong. A mortal time bias involves a guaranteed survival window misassigned to treatment, which is not the mechanism described. Choice E wrong. Severity driving both treatment and outcome is confounding by indication. What does this indicate and how should it be handled? A drug's effect on stroke risk differs by age. In patients under 60, the relative risk is 0.9, but in patients over 60, it is 0.4. The stratified estimates are clearly different from each other. Read the command, meaning of differing stratum estimates, and the fix. The effect genuinely varies by age. When stratum-specific estimates truly differ 0.9 in the young versus 0.4 in the old, the exposure's effect is being modified by age. This effect modification is a real biological finding, so you report each stratum separately rather than collapsing them into one number. Unlike confounding, it is not a nuisance to adjust away, it is information to preserve. Correct answer is A. Confounding produces stratum estimates that are similar to each other but differ from the crude value, and it is something you adjust away. The opposite of preserving distinct strata. Choice B. Wrong. A clean lot split by age is a systematic biological pattern, not random error to ignore. Choice C. Wrong. Iframe. Stratum estimates are effect modification reported separately. What type of error has the study made? Two drugs truly differ in effectiveness, but a small study fails to detect the difference and concludes the drugs are equivalent. Read the command. The error of missing a real difference. Failing to detect a true effect is a false negative. A TYP2 error is a false negative, failing to reject the null hypothesis when a real difference actually exists. Here, the drugs truly differ, but the study missed it and wrongly called them equivalent. Its probability is beta, and it is most often caused by too small a sample, low power. The correct answer is D. A type I error is the opposite mistake, a falsely positive, claiming a difference that does not exist, whereas here a real difference was missed, choice a wrong. Publication bias concerns which studies get published, not the statistical error made within this one study, choice e wrong. Missing a true difference is a type 2 error. Which error is such a study most likely to produce? A study is underpowered because its sample size is too small for the effect it is looking for. Read the command. The error an underpowered study invites. Too little power means real effects slip through. Power is the probability of detecting a real effect equal to 1 minus beta. When a study is using word, beta is high, so it frequently fails to detect true effects, a TYPE2 error. Low power does not raise the false positive rate, it raises the false negative rate. The correct answer is C. A type I error rate is set by alpha and is not increased by low power, so an underpowered study is not especially prone to false positives, choice A wrong. Underpowered studies do not systematically overstate effects as their defining problem. Their signature failure is missing real effects, choice D wrong. Low power most likely yields a type 2 error. What does beta 0.03 actually mean? A trial reports beta 0.03. A student interprets this as there is a 3% chance that the null hypothesis is true. Read the command, the true meaning of a p-value. It is a probability computed assuming the null is true. A p-value is the probability of observing data as extreme as, or more extreme than, what was seen. Assuming the null hypothesis is true. It is a statement about the data given the null, not the probability that the null itself is true. A p of 0.03 means such data would be uncommon if the null held, so we reject it. The correct answer is E. Reading p as the probability the null is true is the classic misinterpretation. The p-value conditions on the null, it does not measure the null's probability choice, A wrong. A small p-value speaks to statistical, not clinical, importance. A significant result can still be trivial in size, choice C wrong. The p-value is the chance of data this extreme if the null were true. Which change will narrow the confidence interval? Investigators found that 95% confidence interval was too wide and want a more precise, narrower interval in the next study. Read the command how to narrow a confidence interval. More data shrinks the standard error. A confidence interval narrows as precision improves, and the most direct way to improve precision is a larger sample size, which shrinks the standard error. More data pins the estimate down more tightly, producing a narrower interval around it. The correct answer is B. Raising the confidence level to 99% makes the interval wider, not narrower, because you demand more certainty of capturing the true value, choice C wrong. A smaller sample size increases the standard error and widens the interval, the opposite of what is wanted, choice A wrong. A larger sample size narrows the confidence interval. How should this be interpreted? A very large trial finds that a drug lowers systolic blood pressure by an average of 1 mmHg with p-www1. The result is highly statistically significant, but a 1 mmHg drop is unlikely to matter to any patient. Read the command, reconcile a tiny effect with a tiny p-value, significant on paper, meaningless in the clinic. With a very large sample, even a trivial effect can be statistically significant because huge samples detect the smallest differences. But a 1 mmHg drop has no meaningful benefit for patients, so it is not clinically significant. Statistical significance answers, is it real? Clinical significance answers, does it matter? And they can diverge. The correct answer is D. Calling it clinically significant ignores that a 1 mmHg change is far too small to help patients' choice or wrong. The result is statistically significant. P is well below 0.05, so denying that is wrong, choice C wrong. A tiny effect with a tiny p-value is statistically but not clinically significant. Which correction is this? Researchers plan to test 10 separate hypotheses in one dataset and want to keep the overall chance of any false positive result at 5%. They lower the significance threshold applied to each individual test. Read the command, the fix for many comparisons. Split the alpha across the test to hold the overall error at 5%. The Bonferroni correction guards against false positives from multiple comparisons by dividing the overall alpha by the number of tests. Here, 0.05 divided by 10, so each test must reach p.05. This keeps the family-wide type I error near 5% despite testing many hypotheses. It is conservative but simple. Correct answer is A. Intention to treat is a method for analyzing RCTs by randomized assignment, not a fix for multiple comparisons, choice B wrong. Stratification controls confounding by analyzing within subgroups. It does nothing about the inflated false positive rate of many tests, choice D wrong. Lowering the per test threshold to protect the overall alpha is the Bonferroni correction. What does the null hypothesis state? Before analyzing a trial that compares a new drug with placebo, the statistician states the hypothesis that the test will try to reject. Read the command, the content of the null hypothesis. It is the statement of no difference. The new hypothesis is the default claim of no difference or no association between the groups being compared. Statistical testing tries to reject it. If the data are unlikely under the null, we reject it in favor of the alternative. It is always the nothing is going on statement. The correct answer is C. Claiming the new drug is superior is the alternative hypothesis, the statement you accept only if you reject the null, not the null itself choice, or wrong. Adequate power is a property of the study design, not the content of the null hypothesis, choice D wrong. The null hypothesis states there is no difference between the groups. Which type of test is appropriate? Investigators want to detect whether a new drug differs from placebo in either direction. It could turn out better or worse, and they set up their significance test accordingly. Read the command, the test for a difference in either direction. Both tails must be considered. A TWO, tail test checks for a difference in either direction, the drug being better or worse than placebo, splitting the alpha between both tails of the distribution. It is the standard, more conservative choice whenever you do not know in advance which way the effect will go, which is almost always. The correct answer is D. A one-tailed test only looks for a difference in one pre-specified direction and would miss an effect the other way, so it does not fit in either direction. Question, choice A wrong. A non-inferiority test is a one-sided design, asking only whether a drug is not worse by a margin, not whether it differs in either direction, choice E wrong. Detecting a difference either way calls for a two-tailed test. What is the SEM and how does it differ from the SD? A sample of 100 patients has a mean cholesterol of 200 mg/dl and a standard deviation of 20 mg/dl. A researcher wants the standard error of the mean. Read the command, compute the SEM and state what it means. Divide the SD by the square root of n. The standard error of the mean equals the SD divided by the square root of n, 20 over the square root of 100, which is 20 over 10, or 2. The SEM measures how precisely the sample mean estimates the true mean, and it shrinks as sample size grows. The SD, by contrast, measures the spread of individual values and does not fall with more data. The correct answer is B. The value 2 is correct, but the SEM measures the precision of the mean, not the spread of individual patients. That spread is what the SD describes. Choice D, wrong. Calling the SEM equal to the SD ignores the division by the square root of n, which makes the SEM much smaller. Choice A, wrong. The SEM here is 2 and reflects the precision of the mean. Which statistical test is appropriate? A researcher compares the proportion of patients cured, a yes/no categorical outcome, between two treatment groups. Read the command. The test for comparing proportions. Categorical outcomes call for chi-square. The chi-square test compares categorical data. Here the proportion cured versus not cured across two groups. It works on counts and proportions, not on averages. Whenever the outcome is a category, yes, no, cured, not cured, rather than a number, chi-square is the go-to test. The correct answer is E. A two-sample t-test compares means of a continuous variable between two groups, not proportions of a categorical outcome. Choice D, wrong. ANOVA also compares means across 3 or more groups and likewise does not fit categorical data. Choice B, wrong. Comparing proportions between groups uses the chi-square test. Which test compares these two related means? A study measures each patient's weight before and after a diet, comparing the two measurements within the same individuals. Read the command. The test for before and after in the same people. Matched measurements call for a paired test. A paired TT test compares two related means, the same individuals measured before and after, by analyzing each person's change. Because the two measurements come from the same people, they are not independent, so the pairing must be respected. This increases power by removing between-person variability. Correct answer is A. A two-sample, unpaired t-test compares two independent groups, which is wrong when the same patients are measured twice. The data are related, not independent. Choice B, wrong. ANOVA compares the means of 3 or more groups, not a before and after pair, in one group. Choice D, wrong. Before and after in the same people uses a paired TT. Which analysis is appropriate? Researchers compare the time until death between two cancer treatments, accounting for patients who are still alive, censored when the study ends. Read the command. The analysis for time to event with censoring. Survival data needs survival methods. Time to event data with censoring. Patients still alive at study end are analyzed with Kaplan, mere survival curves, and two curves are compared using the Ology-Ranke test. These methods properly handle censored observations, which ordinary tests cannot, by using each patient's follow-up time up to the point they are lost or the study ends. The correct answer is C. A chi-square test compares proportions at a single point and ignores both the timing of events and censoring, so it wastes the survival information. Choice A, wrong. ANOVA compares group means of a continuous variable and cannot handle censored follow-up times. Choice D, wrong. Survival data with censoring call for Kaplan-Meier and the log-rank test. How do the mean and median income compare? In the neighborhood, most household incomes are modest, but a handful of billionaires also live there, producing a strongly right-skewed income distribution. Read the command, mean versus median and right skew. A few huge values drag the mean upward. In a right skew positively skewed distribution, a few very large values, the billionaires, pull the mean toward the high tail while the median stays near the bulk of typical incomes, so the mean ends up greater than the median. The mean chases outliers. The median resists them, which is why median income is reported for skewed data. The correct answer is D. Having the median greater than the mean is the pattern of a left-skewed distribution, where low outliers pull the mean down. The opposite of this case, choice B, wrong. The mean equals the median only in a symmetric distribution, which a few billionaires rule out, choice A, wrong. Right skew makes the mean greater than the median. Which type of regression is appropriate? A researcher wants to model the probability of a binary outcome, whether a patient develops disease, yes or no, from several predictor variables. Read the command, the model for a binary outcome. A yes-no outcome needs logistic regression. Logistic regression models a binary yes-no outcome from one or more predictors, producing odds ratios. It is the right tool whenever the dependent variable is a category with two levels. Linear regression is instead used when the outcome is a continuous number, like blood pressure. The correct answer is B. Linear regression is for a continuous outcome variable, not the yes-no one, and would give nonsensical predictions outside 0 and 1 for a binary outcome, choice A, wrong. Chi-square tests association between two categorical variables but does not model an outcome from multiple predictors, choice D, wrong. A binary outcome model from predictors uses logistic regression. What is the physician's obligation? A physician diagnoses a patient with active pulmonary tuberculosis, a reportable, communicable disease. The patient asks the physician to keep the diagnosis completely private. Read the command, the duty for a reportable disease. Public health reporting overrides confidentiality. Certain communicable diseases, including active tuberculosis, are legally reportable to public health authorities to protect the community. This mandatory reporting overrides patient confidentiality and does not require the patient's consent. The duty to protect public health outweighs the individual's wish for privacy here. The correct answer is E. Keeping it fully confidential ignores the legal duty to report a communicable disease that threatens others, choice A, wrong. Reporting does not wait for the patient's consent. It is mandatory regardless of the patient's wishes, choice C, wrong. Active tuberculosis must be reported to public health authorities. What is the status of withdrawing the ventilator? The family of a dying, terminally ill man asks to stop the ventilator, that is prolonging his death, consistent with his previously stated wishes. The team hesitates, feeling that stopping a treatment already started is different from never starting it. Read the command, the status of withdrawing an unwanted treatment. Stopping and never starting are treated the same. Ethically and legally, withdrawing a treatment the patient does not want is equivalent to withholding it in the first place. Honoring a valid refusal by stopping the ventilator lets the underlying disease take its course. It is neither euthanasia nor assisted suicide because the intent is to respect the patient's wishes, not to cause death. The correct answer is A. Withdrawing life support to honor a patient's wishes is not physician-assisted suicide, which means giving a patient the means to end their own life, choice B, wrong. It is also not active euthanasia, which requires an act I intended to cause death, such as a lethal injection. Here, the disease causes death once the unwanted treatment stops, choice D, wrong. Withdrawing is ethically and legally equivalent to withholding. What should guide the decision? An incapacitated patient has a valid written advance directive, living will clearly stating he does not want cardiopulmonary resuscitation. His adult children at the bedside insist that everything be done. Read the command. What governs when a directive conflicts with family? The patient's own documented wishes when? A valid advance directive expresses the patient's own autonomous wishes and takes precedence over family members' preferences. Because the living will clearly refuses CPR, that instruction must be followed even though the children want everything done. The directive speaks for the patient, who ranks above any surrogate. The correct answer is C. Following the children's demand for full resuscitation would override the patient's clearly documented refusal. violating his autonomy, choice, A wrong. Defaulting to do everything to be safe, likewise ignores a valid directive that specifically declines CPR choice, E wrong. A valid written advance directive guides the decision. That's the block. 40 reps on the traps that decide hard biostat questions. 60 seconds to lock the patterns. Match the design to whatever is rare, and remember the crossover washout clears carryover. Pooled randomized trials sit at the top of the evidence pyramid. Selection biases decide WHO gets study. Naaman drops the early deaths. The healthy worker effect makes any job look protected. Random misclassification hides real effects toward the null. Overdiagnosis inflates survival while mortality stays flat. The p-value is the probability of the data given the null, not the probability the null is true. Big samples make trivial effects significant. Match the test to the data type, and in ethics, report communicable disease, and withdrawing unwanted treatment equals never starting it. Train process, not memorization. StepLogic, learn how to think, not memorize. Next weekend, we go deep on ethics and professionalism.